An EPA official has admitted there is no evidence to support Norfolk Southern's decision to detonate 5 toxic vinyl chloride cars in East Palestine, Ohio. According to new reporting from Status Coup News, the official was reportedly unaware he was being recorded. Sil Caggiano, a hazardous waste specialist, said they did this to get the lines open. The owner of 5 toxic vinyl chloride cars involved in the East Palestine disaster had this to say.
Steve met with Norfolk Southern's emergency response contractors and, for the third time, stated Oxyvinyl's view that polymerization of VCM was not occurring. In summary, although our rail cars did not initiate the derailment and did not breach in the derailment, we provided technical support to Norfolk Southern and its emergency response contractors. We sent a team to Ohio to support Norfolk Southern's response effort, and we provided information regarding stabilized VCM. We advised that the temperature of the rail cars should be monitored, and we communicated our view that polymerization was not occurring. I want to emphasize that we did not have direct access to real-time information regarding conditions at the derailment site.
So joining us now to tell us more is CEO of Status Coup, Jordan Chariton. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you make of what he said just there? To me, it sounds like this could have been a decision that they made to cut costs when it comes to the cleanup or shirk some responsibility or legal accountability. What do you make of what he said there in the testimony?
Yeah, what the manufacturer of the actual chemical said kind of aligns what I've been hearing for months and what we've been covering on our YouTube channels at Status Coup. It never really made sense. On the Sunday night before they detonated the cars, Norfolk Southern said there was 1 car that was at risk of, according to them, uncontrolled explosion. And then overnight, it became 4 more cars. They never really provided any evidence of such. And now we know from the actual manufacturer of the chemical that they were repeatedly telling Norfolk Southern there's no risk of polymerization, which basically means, the temperature getting so hot and the chemicals pressure expanding to the point of an uncontrolled explosion. We also know that Norfolk Southern wanted to do it even earlier in the day at noon Eastern on a Monday when kids were still in school, when the town was not fully evacuated. But fortunately, officials said, no, you have to do it later when school is out. But honestly, in a non-scientific, wonky explanation, because it does get a little, scientific with the terms, Norfolk Southern did not have to detonate highly cancerous chemicals over this small town. And it seems they did so because if they would have not detonated the cars, it would have taken, by experts we've spoken with, maybe another week to open up, to extract the chemicals from those rail cars, fully open up the train track, and it would have cost them about $1 million a day.
That's a pretty stunning admission then from Norfolk Southern and this EPA official that they apparently didn't have to detonate those cars and risk the health of all of these people. Is there any chance of Norfolk Southern being held accountable for this decision making? What are the enforcement mechanisms for making sure that they either have to pay out or that somebody in charge is punished for the sickness that was brought to the residents of East Palestine?
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for bankers, fossil fuel executives, and many others to be criminally prosecuted. So I'm not holding my breath. But I mean, we did reach out to the Attorney General of Ohio. We were told, check the box, that they were monitoring those hearings. But there seems to be definitely a criminal case. I do know there are attorneys looking into that and building a case. Whether it actually goes anywhere, we don't know, because that's the star witness. I mean, why Norfolk Southern was not listening to the manufacturer of the chemical at the chemical of concern. Who would you trust the most to tell you whether these chemicals were at risk of exploding? You would trust the manufacturer who made it. It seems from their testimony that they were actually cut out of emergency response discussions right before the detonation because he was not giving the railroad company the answer they wanted. So there should be criminal prosecution. We do know how American history has played out, that we do see record fines, and that kind of cheered as a victory for residents. But, those fines are not going, the fines and eventual lawsuit settlements will not really help residents who develop cancer and other permanent injury. We're talking to residents every day for months, dizziness, headaches, nausea, burning eyes, worse. And this is a highly cancerous chemical that causes liver cancer, lung cancer, brain cancer, other ailments. So there should be definitely a criminal investigation into who knew what when. Norfolk Southern should have to provide actual scientific chemistry evidence that they had no other choice. And the EPA has a role here too, because the EPA has been really echoing the line that the company has been saying for months until that official accidentally told the truth, not knowing he was recorded.
What do you make of the recent Supreme Court ruling in Mallory versus Norfolk Southern? This was a really interesting case where you had an employee of Norfolk Southern say he was exposed to carcinogens while he was on the job. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania said that this wasn't a case that could be brought under the jurisdiction of Pennsylvania simply because the corporation was not registered to do business in Pennsylvania. That's not where it was based, but because it was operating in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court actually sided against Norfolk Southern and said that it was a fair lawsuit. How do you think that Supreme Court case would set a precedent so that Norfolk Southern could be held accountable in Ohio for their actions here?
Well, the jurisdictional question in that case might come into play here because obviously East Palestine, rightfully so, has gotten a lot of attention. But we should also note, I mean, the plume went far and wide. There's people sick in Pennsylvania. There's people who are affected in West Virginia. We've even spoken with people in parts of New York that had health symptoms days and weeks after this because this went, not necessarily within the 1 mile that Norfolk Southern said. So it will be very important based on that Supreme Court decision to see if courts state, well, the accident happened in Ohio, so Pennsylvania residents might have no leg to stand on, or rule against Norfolk Southern because this train was, yes, it happened in East Palestine, but the line was going through multiple states. So the precedent, them ruling against Norfolk Southern, might help residents that were affected in multiple states. Again, not just Ohio, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere.
Do you think that the Biden administration deserves some criticism for their response to what happened in East Palestine? It took Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, for example, quite some time to even visit the site, although he said that he was monitoring the situation. But it seems like if Norfolk Southern was kind of left to its own devices to decide how to best respond to this train derailment, if there were EPA officials there or transportation officials there, perhaps they could have exercised some influence and prevented them from detonating these cars.
I would ask what response for the Biden administration, because there hasn't really been one.
Sure.
Besides the fact that he has not gone to East Palestine, which I don't understand any rational reason for that other than his own health concerns, which he is an older man. But I mean, Donald Trump, say what you want about him, he went there before the actual president. Not to mention the EPA, which has been very questionable through multiple presidents. I give you what happened in Flint. But the EPA from the beginning was towing the railroads line, that this was a, quote, controlled burn. Our reporting on our YouTube channel clearly showed that this was a prohibited open burn that is against the EPA's regulations. But that EPA official basically said in that secret recording that they don't even need to follow open burn regulations. The Biden administration has kind of provided some officials from FEMA, but not the full power of FEMA, citing that they cannot, by law, give the full force of FEMA and other agencies because it's not a natural disaster like a hurricane or a storm. Whereas if it was like a tornado or a hurricane, they could declare it a disaster. But that doesn't mean they cannot provide a lot more resources for the people of East Palestine. We're talking to residents who are being jerked around. They call Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern tells them to call the county. They call the county. They're just being bopped around bureaucracy to bureaucracy. And when they contact the EPA or the CDC, they're being told, contact your local officials. So there really isn't a coherent federal response. Residents, in addition to health, have to worry about, well, it's not safe to go back to our homes. A lot of them smell like gas stations, but we still have to pay our mortgages. They're not getting support with that. So there really has not been a coherent, thorough response from President Biden or the EPA. And we should say, I mean, East Palestine is a conservative area that went for Trump. I wonder how it would have played out if it was a more Democratic stronghold.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on the program today and breaking that down.
Thanks for having me.
More Rising after this.